The Last of Us Episode 2 has been released, and in this second of my Last of Us series of Versus videos, we are going to see how it compares to the exact same section of the game. Let the battle commence. Now, the opening of the show is in keeping with the first episode's opening, whereby it adds an additional scene where it addresses the virus before it goes wide. And although I wasn't crazy about the opening in the first episode, in this episode, I gotta tell ya, it was frightening, and it shows that people were aware that this infection was coming, and this scene was grotesque and full of tension, and gave us a tad bit of body horror too. I really like this scene a lot. The game is very self-contained, and scenes like this open the world up a bit and make the story feel more grand in scale, and this can be easily exploited and dragged out, but this show is doing a good job at using them sparingly in its openings. Now in the game, you see our trio of characters running away from the soldiers surveying the area until they eventually get to their destination. In the show, they just skip all that and show them the next morning at a campsite where they're hiding out. Now, although I would usually say this is another example of the show skipping an action scene, I am willing to give it a pass as its removal didn't feel like a major loss. They still end up having the same conversation with Ellie about what Marlene's plan was for when they deliver her to the Fireflies. Although I will say that the conversation felt more high stakes in the game, as it was just followed by an intense escape sequence and all the characters are on edge. In the show, everyone is much more calm and the conversation takes a more humorous angle. And I loved the joke when Joel and Tess have some crusty old rations and Ellie here is packing a chicken sandwich. So I liked both of these versions of the conversation, but I do prefer the game's version. It was all part of one sequence and the tension was maintained. The show less so, but in this case, that certainly wasn't a bad thing, as I still really enjoyed the different take. And this is the first conversation in the show that felt a lot more natural and even loose, which I really do appreciate. All of the complaints that I had with the first episode's tone and atmosphere, they were all addressed in this second episode. Everything that the game had, which was severely lacking in the show, has all been restored in this episode. The leg ups, one character moving objects out of the way so the others can pass, the unstable environments, the destructible environments, the action sequences, it's all here. I'm surprised it was so lacking in the first episode. Maybe they used all of their budget on that opening scene so they couldn't afford another shootout. Whatever the reason, this episode felt much better balanced. And Neil Druckmann's directing is a night and day difference over the directing in the first episode. Even the performances are so much better in this episode. I through and through felt like I was watching top tier Last of Us. And for the first time, I can't wait to see more. And there are a lot of practical effects here too. Yeah, none of that Disney Marvel crap here. They have excellent production value, and if there was CGI, you couldn't tell. Or they did a damn good job of covering it up. Now, not much happens in this section of the game as it's heavily reliant on providing extra gameplay, one of the things being the introduction of the clickers. And as someone who has played the game, I like the feeling that I know why the characters are suddenly being quiet. Newcomers won't know and will be anticipating what this threat is, whereas I was just anticipating what these look like in live action. And we'll talk about the action in a moment, but as far as they looked, I thought they looked a lot more rotten and disfigured in the game. Almost like you had to look twice to figure out they were once humans. Whereas in the show, they are obviously people with an unusually bad skin condition. But they still looked really good, and honestly, I thought they got their movements down to a T. And it was great how they used the exact same sound effects from the game. As for the clicker sequence itself, this was fantastically directed and was full of tension throughout the entire scene. It felt very reminiscent in parts to the Velociraptor scene in Jurassic Park, and the scene was helped by the fantastic set design. The recreation of the hotel, the museum, and every other location in this episode has been ripped right out of the game, and it was so great to see how the gameplay with the clickers was adapted to a movie-like presentation. The only thing that was really different about the story for this episode was Tessa's death. The setup was the same, but the execution was different. In the game, the soldiers show up and she buys Joel and Ellie some time to escape. In the show, however, the zombies close in on their location and Tess blows them up. But not until the lighter deliberately doesn't light, just so it can milk the tension for a bit longer. Alright, diva, isn't it? And also, so a zombie can make out with Tess. Yeah, the zombie kiss was weird, and it seemed like a very odd touch, one that I really could have done without. I mean, the zombies mindlessly attack and eat people, not make out with them. Also, in the show, Tess was bit off screen, whereas in the game, you can see the moment where she most likely got bit. I'm fine. So yeah, that is pretty much it in terms of story and action. Pretty much exactly what happens in this section of the game happens in this episode, only the game makes it longer and the show condenses it to 45 minutes. So, which had the superior story and action? Well, as much as I loved both of the executions in these two mediums, I'm gonna have to split this round right down the middle. The story was better in the game, and the action was better in the show. Now, I didn't really know what to think of Bella Ramsey as Ellie in the first episode. We didn't see much of her and it was kind of distracting how little the actress looked like the character. But what she doesn't have in looks, she makes up for in personality. She really has a strong peg on the delivery of Ellie. We got to see more sides to her personality here and I was constantly being impressed with how she embodied the character of Ellie. Is it perfect? Not yet. But once we get to see even more sides to her character as well as her relationship with Joel develop, I have little doubt that she will absolutely deliver with those scenes. She also gets injured by the clickers during their encounter, which is new. In the game, they get injuries from everything but the zombies and clickers, but here they gave her a little bite and she's like,
I mean, if it was gonna happen to one of us.
and I really liked that. I also like how Tess goes off finding a way in, and meanwhile Joel and Ellie are chatting. That felt very video game-like, where two of the characters were the focus and the third goes off screen. And the playful banter between Ellie and Joel is here, and it's awesome. And they're in the snarky phase of their relationship right now, but as it continues, it will get better and become more endearing as it goes. One thing that rubbed me the wrong way though, was when Tess told Ellie that her and Joel are not good people. I could buy that in the game, such as when they ruthlessly interrogate and kill Robert and his people, but here in the show, they cut that out, so we didn't get to see what kind of bad people they are here. Joel was much more hardcore in the game, and was willing to kill people that were just trying to get by, and this show seems to have made him a nicer guy, so I thought that line didn't carry the same weight in the show. And as for that scene, that being Joel losing Tess, I thought Pedro Pascal did a much better job with his emotional performance here. You can tell that Neil Druckmann is directing this episode because he knows how to get emotional reactions out of his actors, and I honestly felt more for Joel here than I did in the first episode when he lost his daughter. And Anna Torv, who plays Tess, I wasn't really a fan of her acting in the first episode. She seemed to only have one mode, whereas the Tess in the game had more of a range. She would be very cautious and badass, but she'd also be very laid back and cool. But in episode 2, Anna really comes into her own and shows more range. Still not as much as the one from the game, but so much more than she did in the first episode. So much so that if she stuck around for one more episode, I think her death would have been even more tragic in the show. But I'm glad they didn't delay it. It made this episode end with one hell of a bang. No pun intended. And the look on Joel's face when she dies, that was powerful. That being said, just as I described the emotions of Sarah's death in the last Versus video, the performances in the game just strike you as more real. Even when Joel and Tess argue, you just feel it in your stomach. And you can even hear Tess's voice break as she says she's not going anywhere.
Our chance! It is over, Tess! Now we tried. Let's just go home.
I'm not going anywhere. This is my last stop.
As much as I loved their interactions in the show, it again felt like acting. Very good acting, but acting nonetheless. In the game, the performances started out feeling real, and they continue to feel real. It's amazing how this game has acting that is this good. It even makes the great acting in the show feel like lesser acting. Interestingly, the game had more of a subtle sacrifice. The sacrifice in the show had much more of an emphasis on it, and I do think that the sacrifice was better in the show. It was more Hollywood, there was no doubt about it, but it was more dramatic and even showed Joel's immediate reaction to her death, which we weren't able to see in the game because he and Ellie had to escape and be on their toes immediately after. And there was also quite a lengthy escape sequence that follows in the game. But the episode ultimately ends at this point, and I think that was a very good point to end. So, fantastic character portrayals in both versions, but mainly due to the ending, I gotta say, The Last of Us with a superior version of the characters is the game. My one complaint with this episode is that I think the music is really lacking. The actors are doing a great emotional job, the director, the cinematographer, and the crew are also doing an amazing job, but the music really doesn't have that emotional, heart-wrenching melody that really tugs at your heartstrings. And that is bizarre when you take into account that the composer for the show is the exact same composer from the game, so I don't know why his music is really not as good here. He could even repeat his previous superior themes, but he doesn't, and instead goes with his newer ones. It's cool whenever it's background music, when they are walking and talking, but when it needs to be more involved, it just doesn't hit for me. It's time for the scores. There really wasn't much story going on as the story takes a step back to make way for the gameplay elements, but I thought that both of these did a fantastic job at moving the story forward, although I would say that the game does stretch out its gameplay just a bit more than it should. That being said, this portion of the game gets a high 9 out of 10, and episode 2 of the show, I was very impressed, and a lot of the complaints I had with the first episode have been rectified, the music being the only remaining problem. So yeah, this episode majorly goes up to a 9 out of 10. Both are as good as each other, but if I had to choose, I would actually say that the episode was a touch more enjoyable to watch than the game, and that is largely down to its 45-minute runtime, which perfectly condensed the episode to its most important parts, whereas the game did drag on a bit with their escape. This show is verbatim giving you what was in the game and not pointlessly reinventing it to make it better. I love how faithful it's being to the source material, and I will always appreciate that. Although, I won't mind if they go against the source material for The Last of Us 2, as the show has been renewed for a second season, and according to Neil Druckmann, it will follow the story for The Last of Us 2. Fingers crossed they completely change it. I don't think HBO will be happy if Neil decides to retire Pedro Pascal from the show. So, that's my versus video for The Last of Us Episode 2. Subscribe and hit that like button below, and let me know your thoughts about this episode. And don't forget to donate to me via Patreon for tons of additional content. All your donations support me and allows me to do this full time, and it will also enable me to create even more content going forward. Thank you so much for watching another video, guys, and I will catch all of you very soon. Take care.